Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Chicago Northwestern Harvard Subdivision and N Scale. This is Tim, and it has been another very productive week on the layout. And you can see I started off not with just building some additional layout, but working on some other important to-do items, which is I really want to get my consists of multiple locomotives formed up and speed matched, so that way once I do get a little more track and I actually start doing some operations, I've got some locomotives I can lash up to pull some of the larger trains. And so I wanted to take a crack at actually speed matching some of the locomotives. So I've got a Kato SD70 ACE and a Scale Trains Dash 9 that I'm working on getting speed matched close enough that I can consist them without having the locomotives fight each other. And so you'll see here as I'm getting the two of them on the same track and ready to go. There was a pretty big difference when I first tested it, and actually this clip that I'm showing you is after I already made some adjustments to the CVs governing the bottom end and top end of what the voltage is on the speeds. And so I set them up in a consist real fast so you can see what I was trying to tinker with. I know that there's more granular options. If you're using Decoder Pro, I haven't gotten to that point yet, so I'm just doing real simple CV edits on the programming track. But you can see here that when I tried to run the two of them, you're gonna see that there's a difference in the speed. I set the starting level CV to the same amount, and you can see that the Scale Trains Dash 9 is creeping up on the SD70 to the point where it would, in my mind, be a problem, and I wanted to keep tinkering with it and try and get it to be a little bit more precise. And you can see it better here when I line them up, kind of in the same starting position on two different tracks. You can see it's pretty close after I did some tinkering at the starting level. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be close enough where they're not going to be overly fighting each other and potentially burning each other out. But the issue was on the top end. So I ran the locomotive on speed step 28 for 10 seconds, and this is where the scale trains finished. When I ran the Kato SD70 for 10 seconds at speed 28, this is where it finished. I mean, all the way through around the loop to the other side. So I really had to adjust the Kato's top end to get it more in line with the scale trains. And then it just becomes a matter of tinkering and finding that sweet spot, because as you're going to see here, when I put him back on a consist again, I actually overcorrected on the Kato a little bit, to try and, because it's kind of a guessing game, again, the way that I was doing it without using Decoder Pro, without actually connecting it to a computer, just manually adjusting the CVs. You're going to see here as it runs, now all of a sudden the scale train, again, is going faster than the Kato is. So I had to go back again and make some manual adjustments. My goal is to do this a little bit. I didn't want to do a bunch of them at the same time. I figured that would lead to kind of burnout. And so my goal is, each week take on a consist that I know I want to do. I've got these two I know I want to consist. I've got three Kato Dash 9s that I want to consist together, which hopefully that'll be easier given the fact that they're, same model, same manufacturer. And you can see here I'm trying out the different speed steps to see where I need to make the adjustments. I was able to avoid it. I was really hoping to avoid having to adjust the mid-level voltage. I just really wanted to adjust the top end and bottom end to get it to where I needed it to be. So again, that's my goal, is each week to do that, because that way I want to make it easier to be able to send last ships out of larger trains. Because again, that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to run this at N scale, was I wanted to be able to run closer to prototypical length trains. And again, right now the layout exists in the year 2013. And obviously in that more modern time, the trains are going to be running a little bit longer. You can see here in this poll that I've got them pretty darn close to where I want them to be in terms of speed and running. They're pretty much running neck and neck, which is, again, it's close enough to where I want it to be. I made one final last little tweak, and you can see there's a little bit of a delay in terms of the start time for one of the two locomotives, but outside of that, it's pretty dang spot on and pretty dang good. And this really only took, again, a few minutes of my time, and kind of adjusting and tweaking back and forth to get it to where I wanted it to be. And my main concern is I just don't want one locomotive to be kind of burning out, pushing, fighting against the other. So after I tried various speed steps, I knew it was good to go. And obviously, the real moment of truth came at this point when I actually physically lashed them up together to make sure. And even when I did that, it was a smooth start, no issues, and it was ready to run. And you saw in the intro clip, this is, I did run those two. I am getting ready to do additional scenery on that first section. I got these row houses, these N scale row houses off of a great dealer on Etsy. The reason why I'm getting those is because right next to the actual Heller lumber, there's a fairly recent development of tall row houses right there, pretty close to the tracks. It's not right next to Heller lumber in real life. It's like one street over, but close enough. And I thought it would be a nice, interesting kind of piece of background scenery. I measured where those would go, and then I figured out where I wanted Heller lumber to be, and I laid down some styrene sheets in preparation for laying the smooth it that will go there. The next step that I wanted to work on while that was drying, and I sped up this recording here, but just working on getting putting the ties in under where the actual joints are. Again, Pico makes special joiners specifically for this. I'm sure there's a better way. It was a little bit time consuming to do it. You can see I had to kind of slide them in on their sides, and then once I got them where I wanted them to be, the grooves for the rails allowed me to turn them 90 degrees to get them to the position where I wanted them to be. And you'll see here in just a minute, I'm not too concerned about placing them just yet. I just want to get the number of ties in there. Even with the rail joiners, the regular metal rail joiners, there's enough of a groove that you can work it in just fine. And I'm working with a plier, and then I'm using the backside of my X-Acto knife to get them into the position I want them to be in. I ended up having to clip close to where I soldered the wires. I clipped the back end of one of the rails just so that way it would still look close enough, but then I didn't want there to be a gap because there was a wire there. And then what I do, I put some glue down, and then what I do is I take just a little bit of flex track and just line it up flush, and that's how I check my spacing to keep it consistent, to keep it consistent with the rest. And I only wanted to show you one of the three tracks. After that, it gets fairly redundant, but you can see how much of a difference it makes, and it looks so much better to have those gaps filled. And again, kind of like with the consisting, my goal is each week do a little bit of this at a time to avoid burnout. I find that's kind of the important thing. The next thing I did, I had a little bit of smooth it left over from the first version of the layout, so I mixed that up and got that ready to go. And I poured the smooth it for the frontage road in the area that I laid out that I talked about in last week's video. And you can see I got a little bit, I needed to do a little bit more. I'll have to clean up the fascia. That's no big deal. But then I pulled up the other boundary, because so the interior of the fascia served as the boundary line for one side of the road, and then I used the smooth it tape for the other half. I wasn't concerned about the plaster on the other side because I'm going to be putting down some sculpting mold to finish filling in that kind of embankment there. But otherwise, as far as the road was concerned, I was super happy with how that turned out. There's a little bit of bumps, sanding, and then I'm going to fill it in a little bit to cover, and it'll be good to go. But that was the next task. My goal for next week is to work on painting the road, but like I said, I wanted to lay sculpting mold this week. That has some dry time, and I wanted to work on getting that painted and ready to go. But you can see, I think it's going to look really good. And again, I can't wait to get it painted up and then striped and everything. So I had a good amount of sculpting mold left over from the first layout, certainly more than enough to work on this hill section. You can see I didn't just do the hill section, I also worked on filling in the gap between the tracks and then where Heller lumber is going to be. I definitely need to work in smaller batches. I forgot how quickly the surface level can cure pretty quick. I also forgot how long the true dry time for sculpt the mold is. I mean, it takes days for this stuff to truly dry to the point, to the point where it's firm enough to really do some additional hobby work on. But again, that is what it is. The next thing I wanted to work on was building uh, the supports for the overpass, the bridge for the road that's going to go up over the tracks and serve as a view block. So I measured the areas that I needed to fill. That's what the black Sharpie is, and you can see I just took the foam cutter and very slowly worked my way down, trying to keep it as straight as possible for the two sections. And you'll get to see on the layout, if you're not quite following where I'm going to place this, you'll see on the layout where I actually place it here in just a second. Um, and I didn't have to be perfectly precise with this because I'm going to put a layer of sculpt mold on this embankment to help kind of fill it in and make sure that it's got the volume that I want it to. Um, and after that, then that's when I'll start putting in, you know, the dirt level and the ground cover and stuff to fill in the sides. I don't want to pave the road until I have that done. But again, because this is an embankment, then I needed to do an angled cut into the foam to represent where the slope will be for the hill, and then I was able to get it placed. So hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do here, because there will be a bridge to go over the two tunnels again to serve as kind of a view block and a transition into the staging yard. The next step while I was waiting for those two pieces to dry was to work on getting the supports mounted up so I could add the backdrop hardboard where the Arlington Heights area is. And you can see again I sped this up so that way you're not having to watch in real time as I do this. I already put up the shelving brackets, and now what I'm doing is I'm putting up the 2x1 strips that I put right next to it, just so that way there's enough thickness so that way the hardboard goes in front of the brackets and it's not having to run into it at all. That way it's a nice, clean, smooth, even surface and no issues there. Again, my goal is to get this up because I really don't want to do any scenery until I've got the backdrop on, just because of the way that I do it and it's right up there. I want to be able to freely put, especially right here, there's going to be some building flats in this section, so I need to have the backdrop up and ready to go. And so you can see this is what it looked like with the shelving brackets there. And remember, I'm not going to be getting to the second level in a while, but I have to get the shelving brackets up before I can get the backdrop up. So then it was time to put the backdrop up. You can see I'm using some of my, we have an electric lawnmower. I'm using some of the batteries. They do a great job of keeping the hardboard nice and flush while I'm drilling the holes. And then you can see I'm changing it out because I am making sure that the screws will finish flush. So I had to swap the bit out to do that. And then obviously just getting the screws in, and it was good to go. And you can see this is what it looks like. I'll do some sanding and then some joint compound between where the two pieces meet to make sure again it'll be super smooth for where the backdrop actually hits. And that piece was done on my to-do list for this week. The next thing that I wanted to get done on my to-do list was to continue again. My goal is to keep doing little bits at a time for the various pieces, so that way I'm not having stuck doing one task over and over again and really burning out on it. So the goal, I was listening to some lo-fi World of Warcraft while I did this, get another stretch of the track rails painted. So this was a much easier piece because obviously it's not physically attached to the layout. I could move it, but also it's pretty much all straight track. And it's really not that time consuming to tape it down, to get the tape down, because even inside the rails, I just take my X-Acto knife and just gently on the interior of one of the rails make the necessary cut, and then it's just about lifting it up. And I'm not too concerned about, you can see there's a little bit of overspray. I'm not too concerned about that because that top piece of the board is going to be scenic again with a thin layer of sculpt mold, and then ground cover, static grass and stuff. We'll go over it later. So I'm not terribly concerned. But again, it's nice, and you can see I wanted to zoom in. You can see how much of a difference it makes to get the sides of the rails that darker, more accurate looking color. By this point in the week, those two foam pieces had dried, and I was checking using some auto racks to make sure that there was enough clearance for even the longest of cars. You can see here, these are the trickier pieces to make because I've got to have a gradual enough rise up 3 inches to look prototypical. Given that distance, I figured about 18 inches to go up 3 inches was a reasonable enough grade. And again, this isn't going to be perfect right here because I'm going to be using sculpted mold to kind of fill in the gaps. It just has to be a good enough, close enough structure, so that way I'm not having to rely on, the sculpted mold is supposed to be just kind of a base cover. Same thing, the smooth it on the road is supposed to be just a thin layer of cover. And so that was, I felt pretty good about that. The final piece I wanted to work on this week to get ready for doing more scenery next week is painting, getting the base color painted for where I had laid the sculpt mold earlier in the week. I waited about three days to really make sure that it was amply dry. It's not perfectly smooth. I do need to work on getting better about going back and wetting it and trying to smooth out the sculpt mold after I lay it down. But again, for this embankment in this area, it's okay because I'm going to be putting ground cover, static grass, ballast, and that will sufficiently kind of make it so that it looks a little more natural than kind of the lumps that you see right now. But I'm starting it off with, again, just a pretty standard earth tone. I mixed three different browns to kind of get to the color that I wanted to, and I figured it would look good enough, and I can always go back and make any adjustments if I need to. And so then it was time, and then I went through and painted that top area again between where the tracks are and where Heller lumber will be. And then I did end up getting some of the ties with brown. It wasn't as precise as I thought, but I'll go back with some isopropyl alcohol and get that off there before I work on that piece. But I want to get this done before I did the ballasting because I didn't want there to be any white showing through, and there will be some bleed over with the ballast on this, and that's okay. But I wanted to get this done first again to set me up so I could do a little more scenery next week. But that's pretty much it, and this is what it looked like as I finished it up. And it's certainly good progress. Not as monumental as getting the first backdrop up as it was last week, but certainly still good progress nonetheless. And we'll close this week out by having one of the 400 trains take us through, so you can see where the layout is. Because I did finish laying the track on that additional section of bench work that I had laid last week. So that was another point of progress as well. And, my goals for next week are certainly to continue with what I've been able to work on in terms of making that incremental progress. I want to get the road painted. I need to do some track corrections for some smoother running. I do want to start ballasting and then continue to lay those extra sleepers to fill in. You'll see as the 400 rounds a quarter here, right? That next set of 3 tracks where the joints are. Work on the sculpt mold for the bridge. Get ready to lay that, and again get some initial scenery done. I think that's certainly going to be quite a bit to work on next week. So tune in for that video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks everybody for your support. We'll see you next time.